Hi everyone, and welcome to an episode of Trident Talks. Today I'm joined by Rick Holland, the CISO at Digital Shadows. Rick, how you doing?
Hey man, what's up? It's good to be with you, Josh.
So Rick, I suppose let's start with who you are. What's your background? How did you get to, I suppose, being a CISO at DS? And yeah, just kind of walk us through that journey if you wouldn't mind.
I'm based in Texas, Dallas, Texas now, but I graduated high school and went to the U.S. Army, and I went into intelligence. So I did 4.5 years in the Army. I actually spent 2 of those years in the UK. So I was in East Anglia at Molesworth. Is where that's not an uncommon reaction. Although I liked it because we were close to Cambridge. We went to Cambridge pretty often, and I really liked Cambridge. And then we would go down to London. Very easy to get down to London City in the tubes and go around. So I was in the Army, did that intel thing, and then I didn't go to school immediately. And I started doing tech support, did help desk and tech support sort of stuff. And in the US, we had something called Sarbanes-Oxley that came out, which basically made the CEO and the CFO have to sign saying their papers were accurate. This is a whole Enron, Arthur Andersen fallout. And we needed somebody to do the IT auditing. And I was like, well, I'm pretty not enjoying XP builds. Windows XP builds. So I was like, sign me up. So I worked with Deloitte, and that's how I got into security. So a lot of times people will complain about compliance. For me, if it wasn't for the Sarbanes-Oxley or SOX Act, that was my pathway in. And from there, I went to higher education and got a job as an incident responder in the University of Texas at Dallas. Then I was a sales engineer for a couple of years. And then I was a Forrester industry analyst for 4.5 years. And then I covered Digital Shadows at Forrester. And then I've joined Digital Shadows, and I've been here probably about 4.5 years as well.
Was it one of them where you were covering them as the analyst and you were like, I quite like that business, I'm going to approach them, and or just everything aligned at the right time?
One of the things that still is appealing to me about Digital Shadows, and especially if you look at the threat intelligence market, threat intelligence is, a smaller kind of segment, and you certain level of maturity that's required to maximize it. But Digital Shadows was doing things beyond threat intelligence, right? We were looking at digital footprints, looking at broader exposure. So we provide threat intelligence, but we do more. So that kind of resonated with me, and I like that. Plus I like the team. And then of course, I think there was some nostalgia as well, being a UK company. I enjoyed my 2 years in East Anglia and beyond. Yeah. And so I liked coming back.
Just say Cambridge. Much better. Just say Cambridge. Awesome. So now you're obviously CISO DS. What does that involve? What obviously, like you said, you're based in Dallas, Texas. I know you've got a team there. You obviously have a big presence in the UK as well, and again further afield in Europe and APAC. What does your role include? What does a CISO do?
So for me, it's probably a hybrid role, because most CISOs don't also run a commercial threat intelligence team. So I have that component. So we have the client facing component. Then I have the internal security. So the typical security duties that you would have, when you're in the vendor world, I'm concerned about my customers' data, and GDPR world, also, the employee data and the customer data there, intellectual property, or some of the, if I look at my threat model and the data we're trying to protect, that's what we're trying to protect: IP, sensitive documents, and then, any kind of GDPR, personal private data.
And the teams that you manage, are they cross-country, or is it just one specific?
Both of the teams are across the globe. Digital Shadows has always been a remote-friendly company. Even, within the UK, we have folks that periodically would come down to Canary Wharf, but other parts of the country, 4 or 5 hours away, that sort of thing. So we've always been remote-friendly. So it was a little less painful for us doing this migration. But the team is US, UK, and Greece on the security side. And then on the intel side, we're in the US, across the US, obviously in the UK. And then also we have a presence in Singapore.
So let's move into the meat and bones of why I wanted to bring you on. As you alluded to, obviously you're based in Dallas, Texas. A lot of my viewers and listeners and people that subscribe to Trident Talks are UK or EMEA based. So I really wanted to dig into, I suppose, what is the threat intel world? What's it like in the US? Because for me, it's this big, I don't know, it's a big grand illusion where it's so much more mature than it is where we are on the other side. It's a big question, I know, but how is it different? Obviously, you've been in the UK a lot as well. What are the differences?
The one thing I always say, and this goes back to my time at Forrester. In Forrester, I was serving multinational company. So I've been working globally for 9 years now. The generalization I would make from my time at Forrester, and it still is the case, is you would typically see the U.S. market in specific verticals to be a little bit more mature. Then you would kind of see the UK to be kind of the next rung down, and then broader Europe is the next rung down in maturity of a cybersecurity program. And then you kind of see EMEA next. These are very broad generalizations. You go into certain verticals, financials across the globe typically are more mature than other verticals, no matter where they're located globally. But the one thing that I always found at Forrester, and still see it here, is don't assume that people are more mature than they actually are. I work with some of the largest companies in the United States and see some of the threat intelligence programs, and they can be far less mature than one would expect. So sometimes outside looking in, you might think it's super mature, but that is definitely not always the case.
Do you believe, or is that maturity reason because we see a lot, right? The threat intel vendors are predominantly born out of the US, right? In particular areas of the US. And then they typically try and then they'll hire a customer success manager, a head of sales engineering, a BD guy or girl, and they'll come and break into the EMEA market and then move obviously further down the time zone. Do you think that's the reason why? It's just that it was in the early days of the iSites and things like that in 2011, 2012. It's just a time thing.
I think it is. I think you saw the breakouts from the government sector into the private sector into the US. If you look at Mandia and iSight and their backgrounds from the teams that they had, you've got that. But I also think a lot of the intrusion activity that you saw in the US, these vendors kind of were there right time, right place to do the incident response. And then they were gathering the threat intel for it. So I definitely think that's a component. It is interesting coming from a company that started in the UK that's then moved into the US. It's the reverse of what most threat intelligence vendors have. And as you know, right, the UK in particular, the intelligence services there, are top notch as well. So, some of it's timing and things of that nature as well.
I think there's only one or two companies I can think of off the top of my head who have gone reverse. They've tried to break into the US again, which is not easy. How many offices do you currently have, or how many? I know you're fully remote in the US where you operate remotely, but you do have like presence in San Fran, Boston, or
the main offices that we have are Dallas, and then London, and then Singapore. Those are where you see the largest. COVID has kind of spread things out even more so because we've had some staff that have gone from working in offices to fully remote, where they may not have been that in pre-COVID land as well. So it's interesting to see how COVID has changed the workforce.
Do you see any other differences, or is there anything else? I suppose I'm just trying to put my viewer hat on. I'm a threat intel analyst in the UK. I don't know anything really about the US side of things. Is there anything else you can teach us, or the differences in working, or is it just that the US is just such a bigger target that you have different types of battles, I suppose, on a daily basis?
I don't know that the difference in maturity is that significant in the programs when you look at them, especially if you're looking in the financial services, right? And I think because you've had organizations like the FSISAC, I think the FSISAC in the US helped grow the maturation of security operations in general. Threat intelligence is, just one example. And then you'd seen the other ISACs more recently, well, maybe not recent in the past few months, but the healthcare vertical has done a lot of maturity because you've seen a lot of targeting of China against health insurance providers in the US. Yep. And so that kind of formed that. So I think some of the targeting that you've seen forming these industry groups that were putting out stuff. And then I think another big component for maturity has just been MITRE, in particular MITRE ATT&CK. Like, what talk, you get your MITRE ATT&CK checkbox out of the way. But I think a lot of the work that MITRE has been doing has been quite useful, especially if you look at threat intelligence, you look at TTPs, especially to the less mature companies. I think if you look at the pyramid of pain, which I think a lot of your listeners will be familiar with. In fact, we have a podcast, Shadow Talk, and we had David Bianco on, I think it's maybe 3 weeks ago, where he went through the origin story of the pyramid of pain. But I was talking to David about this. It's like the top of the pyramid is the TTPs. And it's always been a confusing component. It's like, how do you, sure, it's easy to disrupt an adversary at the bottom end, or they respond. It's very easy for them to respond, like, IPs, very ephemeral domains, easy to change. At the top, it's harder to do. One of the things I like about MITRE ATT&CK is they've taken in the open source world, all of the reporting that threat intelligence vendors do, right? And here's the TTPs. And I think that's the way I've kind of said it, is almost like democratized threat intelligence, where if you're concerned about Iran, you're looking at APT 33, APT 34, and you're a less mature company, you can go to MITRE ATT&CK framework and you can see, oh, okay, here's the types. Oh, they do a lot of credential stuffing as an example. So I think that has helped. And I think because MITRE ATT&CK, started out in the US, people were learning from that. That may help with some of the maturity that you see. But then flip side of that, one of the things that I got exposed to, Bank of England, threat intelligence led pen testing.
CBEST.
Yeah, CBEST. I was going to say Tiber. Tiber grew out of CBEST.
Yeah, Europe. Yeah,
in mainland Europe. But I actually think there's an area as an example of something that the UK was doing that the US wasn't as mature on. So I was covering this at Forrester. I covered threat intelligence at Forrester. I remember talking to one of our founders, James Chappell, and he was doing a lot of work in CBEST days. And I thought that was a pretty cool way to not just have tick box pen testing, but trying to have pen testing that was aligned to the types of things that your actors and your threat model were doing. So I think that's a good counterpoint on the maturity side. I think the UK was actually ahead of other regions, and you've seen it spread. Tiber as an example. In Singapore, you're seeing,
cost.
Yeah. So I think there's a good example of the counterpoint of here's an area where the UK, I think, was ahead of other markets.
Pro UK. On that, is there anything in the US similar to simulated threat-led pen testing?
I think I'm not aware of anything on that level,
initiatives
at government level, but you're definitely seeing teams do that. And you had seen, even when I was at Forrester 8 years ago, you would see teams doing that. The more mature companies were just doing that natively on their own. Yeah. I think now what you can do if you're a company that doesn't have as much capability, you could take MITRE ATT&CK and you could know your threat model. Here's the actors, and then start to work those into your pen test, or have your pen testing company do that sort of stuff. So I think, again, it's like that democratization of TTPs or threat intel is a good example there. So you're seeing that type of activity in individual companies and sharing that. And then you have that whole new space coming up. It's not brand new, but of the automated pen testing where these tools are running that sort of stuff. But I think you lose the human component of creative red teaming and stuff like that. Like, I think continuous testing is interesting as a control, but it will never get into the mind of a structure. Yeah. It's not going to replace the human. Like this whole replace the human with automation, like the humans still have, the art and science and the art of the human side. I don't see being replaced anytime soon.
No, especially if you want to simulate as much as possible what a threat actor would, the type of attack they would carry out. Doing a Nessus scan is not going to cut the mustard. Good points. So moving forward, and I look forward, I suppose, from an industry point of view, just generally speaking, what are you seeing in terms of the future of threat intel? We obviously touched on automation there. Obviously, that's a big topic at the moment in terms of automating the kind of lower end RFIs and things if you are responding for a platform. Are you seeing certain things? Are you guys preparing for anything in the near future, or has COVID kind of accelerated anything?
COVID's probably made people look at their threat models, or they should be. Like right now, everyone should be like doing risk assessments of this new remote working land. How are adversaries kind of responding to it? I mean, we're seeing the same types of phishing that you always see. Now it's just the lures are related to COVID related things, or whatever the soup du jour is in COVID land there. I think whenever we talk about, this is a Forrester thing for me too, people are always looking forward and like, what's the next hottest thing? I always say it's more blocking and tackling. So when I think about threat intel, both what I'm trying to do in my internal program at Digital Shadows, and then what we're trying to do for customers is just try to get more embedded into their processes. This whole, the self-licking ice cream cone, to use a US military kind of thing about threat intelligence reports or intel porn, however you want to say it, trying to get away from this beautiful, amazing written report, which still can be a problem, like a beautiful RFI, but how do you operationalize that? How do you take that into, environments and stuff like that? So I still think, we can think about cutting edge type of things that we're going to do. And maybe it is threat intel led pen testing and that sort of stuff. But really it's like, how do you integrate into Splunk? And what workflows can you have in Splunk to make things easier for companies?
Yeah, nice. Yeah, fair point. And just lastly, and it is a little bit of a curveball. I like to throw at everybody that just before you leave, Rick, if you were earning cybersecurity, what do you think you'd be doing? And before you answer this, I can see you as like a Divisional One lacrosse champion, or I might be completely wrong, but what would you be doing?
So if money wasn't an issue, it's interesting. It's two things. One, I think it would be, I love World War II history. Love World War. It's part of why I have an affinity for the UK.
Well, because we joined it before you, right? So yeah.
But just all the stuff. When I spent 2 years in the UK, all I did was travel around the UK and Europe. I never came back, took any leave in the US because I just, I saw Patton's grave in Luxembourg. Just very, very cool. But so that would be a component that I would like a PhD in history. But I think what I really like barbecue. Anyone who follows me on social media would know. And Rick H. Holland is my Twitter handle. If I could have my own like barbecue restaurant and just do Texas style barbecue. I love cooking for people. I love cooking for people. And it's one of the things. Last weekend, I did some braided pork belly that I smoked. It's very cool. If you like barbecue, it's super easy to do. But I miss cooking for people. And COVID, like normally we would be doing our Digital Shadows Fall barbecue at my house. And I'd have 40, 50 people here, counting family members. And I miss out on that. So I really enjoy preparing food for people and the social aspects of that as well.
What would it be called? Have you any idea what the restaurant would be called?
It'd be called H. I have an Instagram handle for it already. It'd be H2 Barbecue. My daughter's first names are H's, so H2 Barbecue, and then it's got a little rhyme to it. So
H2 Barbecue. This is a proper thought through plan.
Oh yeah.
James Chappell and Alice, be careful. You'd be out the door if you could.
Yes, you can tell I have given it some thought.
I'll take a look on Instagram. Well, Rick, thank you very much for coming on. It's great even just for me just to learn about a bit more insight around the US market in general. I know people find it really, really useful and helpful. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.